Hello bookworms, I'm Hannah, and today's video is another review of a Women's Prize Longlist nominee. Before I talk about the book, there are two things I want to address. First, I need to correct an error in my review of The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gawar. I wrongly state in that video that Angelica was married to a wealthy duke. She was his mistress, not his wife. And two, I want to say thank you to everyone who commented on my Women's Prize Longlist reaction video with candid thoughts on Red Clocks by Lenny Zumas. I may still read that book at some point to sate my own curiosity, but when that day comes, consider me forewarned. About the book I'm reviewing today, it doesn't really follow a traditional plot, so it would be difficult for me to drop spoilers, but I'll be careful to review the book in a way that leaves much for you to explore and discover for yourself. Today I'm reviewing When I Hit You by Meena Kandasamy. This was a buddy read with Jennifer at Insert Literary Pun here. Jennifer's channel is an abundance of thoughtful, eloquent reviews of literary fiction and classics. Jennifer and I tend to have differing views on books, particularly Women's Prize Longlist books, so we thought it would be fun to read one together and see if our thoughts on the book aligned or clashed. I think this book is fantastic. If you want to know what Jennifer thought, I'll drop a link in the description box to her video review. When I Hit You follows the first-person perspective of an unnamed narrator, a young woman who marries a handsome university professor. She soon learns that the charismatic, respected man he is in public differs significantly from who he is behind closed doors. Her vision of a loving marriage is shattered by his abusive, controlling behavior. And clearly this is a book that tackles a difficult subject, and I know a lot of you are hesitant to pick up a book that centers on physical abuse and rape, but I think you'll be surprised by this book, as I was, if you'll just give it a chance. Meena's voice is totally unexpected. She found a way to make a difficult subject approachable, and I don't mean to be indelicate when I say this, she found a way to make it enjoyable. Her voice is dripping with mock humor. It's unflinching and honest, yet lighthearted and amusing. In the opening pages, the narrator refers to her experience as her misadventures in marriage. It's one of the first instances where we see that she frames her experience with sarcasm, a brilliant move on Meena's part, since people often lean on humor to soften their uncomfortable realities. Which leads me to talk about the psychology of this book, because coping mechanisms play a huge role in how this character conveys her story. She introduces events as though she were directing a film, and she admits that this form of detachment allows her to confront her life. Of the three-room house she shares with her husband, she says, "It makes a perfect film set. And in some ways, that is how I think of it. It is easier to imagine this life in which I'm trapped as a film. It is easier when I imagine myself as a character. It makes everything around me appear less frightening, my experiences at a remove, less painful, less permanent. Here, long before I ever faced a camera, I became an actress." She often introduces events as though she were the self-anointed director moving the camera through a scene. This is a clever metaphor for that dissociative phenomena some people experience during moments of great trauma where they feel as if they're hovering above their own body. The narrator describes a scene unfolding with thunder rolling in the distance to accentuate marital tension and electricity playing truant to bathe the bickering couple in darkness. She makes it sound creative and fun, but beneath the surface she's alluding to a sense of detachment that indicates severe trauma. This detachment from reality is a survival mechanism. It's her way of coping with a life-threatening situation. She admits, "The longer I stretch the act of the happily married couple, the more I dodge his anger. It's not a test of talent alone. My life depends on it." Now, I latched on to this method of conveying the story through the eyes of a film director because I found it so compelling. But to my dismay, it wanes as the book progresses. By chapter 3, it becomes evident that this book has an unorthodox, fractured structure. It doesn't really read like a carefully plotted novel or a short story collection or articles or essays. I was initially frustrated by this, but somewhere along the way, it finally occurred to me that When I Hit You reads like someone's diary. Each chapter has a focus, but the narrator's thoughts on that topic may shift with each new page or each new paragraph. And this made sense to me, in the same way that we sit down to write in our journal and one day reminisce about an old love and the next day share an exciting triumph. In the same way that we begin writing about one thing and then our meandering thoughts take us down a rabbit hole of tangential memories, this book delivers its story and its messages through brief, inconsistent interludes. This wasn't what I wanted from my reading when I was making my way through this book, but I don't fault Mina for that. I appreciate what she accomplishes by choosing to structure her book this way. These passages that read like stolen moments, shared secrets, and hushed confessions quietly draw you in. There's an intimacy achieved through this style of writing that makes this story, this subject, and this poignant issue personal to the reader. I think this works well with a nameless protagonist too, because people don't name themselves in their diary. I would never write in my journal, I, Hannah Greendale, fair-skinned and blue-eyed, went to the store yesterday. When we write in a diary or journal, we relate events to ourselves. And, much like this unnamed narrator, sometimes we do it cryptically, just in case, stars forbid, someone else were to read our private thoughts. By adopting this structure, Mina allows us to see into someone's private life, and by keeping the narrator nameless, she lets us slip in and out of her shoes. Speaking of stepping into another person's shoes, Mina drew from her own experience as an abused wife to craft this book, and I found myself wondering while reading why she elected to write fiction rather than a memoir. By the end of the book, that question is addressed in two places. I'll let you discover for yourself the reasons given, but I will share with you the realization I came to by the time I finished reading. This would not have been as powerful as a memoir. Instead of making this about her, Mina enlarges the picture to include every woman. This isn't Mina's story, and it isn't the unnamed narrator's story. It's every battered and abused woman's story. It's every sexually assaulted woman's story. It's every misunderstood and neglected daughter's story, every scared mother and mother-to-be's story, and every woman who had the courage to speak up for the Me Too movement's story. The point of this book is that unexpectedly finding oneself in an abusive relationship can happen to anyone. And the goal of this book is to show how it happens, how an intelligent, capable, college-educated woman can find herself reduced to a crumbling, brittle shell of a person after just a few months of having been robbed of her autonomy, her voice, and her body. We see the quiet acts of rebellion that sustain her, how familial and societal pressures further prohibit her from breaking free, and it's made clear that standing up for herself and leaving aren't necessarily the most viable solution to her problems, because that route could be the death of her. This book is a reminder to be compassionate and helpful rather than snide and judgmental, and it's a feminist cautionary tale about allowing our identity to be defined by the men or women we date. When we sacrifice too much of ourselves for the people we love, we risk our identity falling to pieces when that relationship fails. And I think a lot of us have been guilty of doing that. I certainly have. But the point is, those pieces can be reassembled. We can learn from our mistakes and be stronger moving forward. When I Hit You is a collection of private entries that portray a woman corroding. Ultimately, it's an elegy. To read this book is to witness a woman's metaphorical death. The question is, will this unnamed narrator succumb to darkness, or will she be reborn? You need to discover the answer to that question yourself when you read this book. At the back of the book is an article written by Deepa D that was published in The Wire. The article provides a list of people you should give this book to, but I can simplify that list. This book is for everyone. Everyone would benefit from reading this book. At this point, I've read half of the books longlisted for this year's prize. When I Hit You is not my personal favorite, but I will be shocked if it does not win this year's prize. If you have any reservations about reading this book, leave a comment and I'll see if I can assuage your concerns. If rape is a trigger for you, skip chapter 10. If I can answer any questions that will convince or allow you to read this book, please leave a comment, or if it would be more comfortable for you, you can private message me on Goodreads. If you've already read When I Hit You, tell me your thoughts and reactions in the comments. I'll see you soon for my next video, which will be another review of a Women's Prize Longlist nominee. Thanks, everybody.